My name is Clara Wells. I'm 65 years old, and I've lived long enough to know that life never whispers. It just waits. Today, I want to share something more than memories. These are truths. Life lessons that crept in quietly and changed everything. You might have clicked on this video by accident, or maybe because something deep inside of you is also searching. Either way, stay with me. These 20 signs I began to notice after 65 didn't just open my eyes. They rescued me. Maybe they'll do the same for you. I started watching these signs because, quite frankly, I was tired. Tired of pretending. Tired of smiling when it hurt. Tired of ignoring the quiet voice inside that kept asking, "Is this really all there is?" Let me tell you something. When you get older, it's not just your body that begins to ache. Your soul does too. And that pain, that ache, doesn't scream. It sighs. It sinks into your mornings, your silence, your stillness. I felt it the day I stopped recognizing the woman in the mirror. That was when I knew I needed to open my eyes, or risk losing myself entirely. So I asked myself one question: what have I been ignoring? That question led me to the very first sign. Sign 1. When silence gets loud, start listening. I discovered the first sign almost by accident. Or at least I thought it was an accident at the time. I used to enjoy silence, a quiet house, no phone calls, no doorbells, no television humming in the background. But slowly, that silence turned into something else, something heavier, a silence that pressed against the walls. That settled into my bones. That made it hard to breathe. It wasn't peace anymore. It was loneliness. And that was the first sign. When silence grows louder than your thoughts, it's time to pay attention. I started noticing the quiet, not just outside, but inside me. Friends weren't calling. Family wasn't reaching out. But more than that, I had stopped reaching out too. I avoided mirrors. I didn't text first. I barely said hello to my neighbor. Somehow, without realizing it, I had faded into the background of my own life. So here's my first piece of advice. If your life has gone quiet, don't ignore it. That silence is speaking to you. I listened to it, really listened, and it took me to the second sign. Sign 2. If you don't recognize who's in the mirror, you might be losing yourself. Mornings used to be a ritual. I'd stand in front of the mirror, run a comb through my hair, add a touch of color to my lips, a bit of light to my eyes. But somewhere along the line, I stopped caring, stopped looking, because the woman staring back at me didn't feel like me anymore. She looked tired, worn. Her eyes didn't sparkle like they used to. Her shoulders had slumped. Her hands trembled ever so slightly. And worst of all, her gaze no longer held hope. It held surrender. One morning, I stood in front of the mirror longer than usual. I forced myself to look, and I asked aloud, "Clara, where did you go?" That question hit hard. It made me realize that the second sign had been there all along. When you no longer recognize yourself, you've drifted too far from who you truly are. We blame aging, but what I saw wasn't just aging, it was abandonment, self-abandonment. Somewhere between work and family, caregiving and expectations, I had stopped caring for me. So I made a promise. Every morning since, I've looked in that mirror, not just with my eyes, but with intention. I brush my hair with tenderness. I dab on a little lipstick, not for the world, but for Clara, because she deserves to be seen. If you're avoiding your reflection, if what you see feels like a stranger, this is your sign. Come home to yourself. You've been waiting. And once I began to truly see myself again, I realized something deeper was holding me back, and that brought me to the third sign. Sign 3. If you want to heal the past, you have to learn to forgive. We all carry something. Some wounds scream, some stay hidden, but they're always there, sitting quietly in the corners of our hearts. For me, it was my brother, Henry. We hadn't spoken in years. We were close once, the kind of childhood bond you think will last forever. But life happened. He made a mistake. I was hurt. He stayed silent. So did I. And eventually, silence became the only thing we shared. But the truth, I missed him. Terribly. Still, I let the years roll by, until one morning I woke up with this sinking feeling. What if today was my last? Would I really leave this world holding on to that silence? That was the third sign. When your heart aches for someone and you choose pride over peace, you're carrying a weight that doesn't belong to you anymore. So I did what I had been afraid to do. I picked up the phone. My hand trembled. When he answered, I said, "Hi, Henry. It's Clara. I'm sorry for all the years we didn't speak." He was quiet. Then, he cried, and so did I. Forgiveness isn't about weakness, it's about freedom. I had chained myself to a moment that no longer existed, and when I let it go, I felt lighter than I had in years. If there's someone you still haven't forgiven, this is your sign. Stop carrying pain that no longer serves you. You deserve to be free. And in that freedom, I found something else, something I hadn't noticed in a long, long time, which led me to the fourth sign. Sign 4. If you feel tired but can't explain why, it's not your body, it's your soul. Tired. That word became a regular part of my vocabulary after 60. But this tiredness, it wasn't like before. I was sleeping but not resting, eating but not nourishing, existing but not living. I went to the doctor, blood work, tests, checkups, everything looked fine. But I didn't feel fine. Something inside me was dimming. That's when I realized this wasn't physical fatigue. This was soul exhaustion. This was the fourth sign. If you're always tired but nothing's really wrong, your spirit might be asking for attention. I sat down one day with a blank page and wrote, "What's draining me?" The answers came slowly but clearly. Trying to please everyone. Holding on to guilt that no one even remembered. Pretending I wasn't lonely. Ignoring my own needs day after day. It wasn't life that was wearing me down. It was how I was living it. So I started making changes. Small ones. Saying no when I meant it. Saying yes to myself, even when no one else understood. Taking slow walks without rushing. Lighting a candle before bed. Writing, even when I had nothing to say. And bit by bit, that heaviness began to lift. If you're feeling tired, and not just in your body, this is your sign. Listen to the parts of you that don't speak with words. They are the ones begging to be heard. As I listened more, something else began to surface. A truth I'd buried beneath routine and responsibility. And that truth led me straight to the fifth sign, sign 5. If your life looks full but feels empty, you might be missing joy. One afternoon, I decided to write down what I did that day. Just a simple list. Woke up, made tea, sat by the window, watched TV, took a nap, went to bed. The next day, same list, and the day after that, again. After a week, I looked back and realized I wasn't living. I was simply repeating. Everything seemed normal, even peaceful. But something was missing. Something important. Joy. This was the fifth sign. If your life is full of tasks but empty of joy, something needs to change. I had routines, yes, but I had stopped laughing. I had stopped being curious. I had stopped noticing the little things. The smell of rain, the way tea tastes when you're in a good mood, the sound of birds that used to make me smile. So I made a new promise to myself. Every day I would look for one moment of joy. Just one. Some days, it was watching a squirrel chase its tail outside. Other days, it was lighting my favorite candle, or listening to a song I hadn't heard in decades. I even danced once, alone, in my kitchen. And I laughed, a real laugh. The more I searched for joy, the more it appeared, like it had been hiding, waiting for me to come back. If your days feel flat, grey, predictable, this is your sign. Start small, look up, smile at something, let yourself feel delight again. Joy doesn't knock, it waits to be noticed. And when I began to notice joy again, something beautiful happened. A forgotten part of me, the part that used to be amazed by life, began to wake up. And that awakening led me straight to the sixth sign. Sign 6. If nothing amazes you anymore, your spirit is asleep. I was sitting on a park bench one afternoon when I saw a little girl, maybe 5 years old, skipping along with a cone of ice cream. Her hat was crooked, her cheeks flushed, and her smile lit up the whole path. Suddenly, the ice cream plopped to the ground. Her eyes widened, a moment of heartbreak. But then, her mother handed her a fresh one. And just like that, her smile returned. Bigger, brighter, as if the world had just given her a second chance at magic. I watched, and for some reason, tears welled up in my eyes, and I realized something. When was the last time I had been amazed by anything? This was the sixth sign. If you've stopped being amazed, your soul has started to sleep. Wonder is what makes life feel big, alive, magical. But over time, we trade wonder for logic, for routine. We say, that's just how things are, and stop noticing the miracle in the mundane. So I made a new vow. Find one thing every day that amazes me. The sky, a song, the way my hands still remember how to thread a needle, the silence of snowfall, the unexpected kindness of a stranger. Every day I let myself be surprised again. And with each small spark of awe, my spirit stretched just a little more awake. If it's been a while since you gasped, smiled at the sky, or paused to stare at something beautiful, this is your sign. Your spirit is not gone. It's simply resting. Invite it back. And once mine began to return, I realized it had one question for me, a question I had been avoiding for far too long. That question became the seventh sign. Sign 7. If you can't answer, who am I, you may have lost your way. It happened one evening while reading. I came across a simple line in an old book. If you don't know who you are, you're just surviving, not living. I closed the book and sat in silence. The words echoed louder than the clock ticking in the kitchen. And so, I asked aloud, softly, almost afraid of the answer. Who am I, Clara? I knew the usual answers. Mother, sister, widow, friend, woman. But they felt like labels, not identity. Where was the girl who used to write poems late at night? Where was the woman who adored the ocean, who loved the smell of fresh peaches, who once dreamed of learning the violin? Where was she? This was the seventh sign. If you've forgotten who you are outside of your roles, you've wandered too far from your essence. For years I lived for others, their needs, their milestones, their chaos. But somewhere along the way, I stopped asking what I wanted, what I loved, what I believed. So I sat with a notebook and began to write. I am Clara. I love early morning tea at sunrise. I cry easily, not from weakness, but because I feel deeply. I get overwhelmed by crowds but find peace in silence. I am still learning, still changing, still here. And with each sentence, I met myself again. If you feel distant from yourself, this is your sign. You are not lost. You are waiting to be found, and you are worth the search. In finding myself again, I came face to face with something I hadn't wanted to admit, a deep, quiet ache I had carried for far too long. That ache became the eighth sign, sign 8. If you haven't laughed from the heart in a long time, something inside you is fading. One day, a friend called and said something simple, something that stopped me cold. Clara, I miss your laugh. She didn't say she missed my voice or my stories. She missed my laugh. That night, I sat quietly on the couch, asking myself, when was the last time I truly laughed? Not politely, not to be nice, but the kind that makes your eyes water and your belly hurt. And I couldn't remember. This was the eighth sign. If laughter no longer comes from deep within, part of you may have gone quiet. Life had become serious, heavy, practical. The kind of life where fun felt like something that belonged to younger people. But why? Who told me that laughter had an expiration date? So I tried something different. I watched an old comedy that once made me laugh out loud. At first, nothing happened. But then, in one silly scene, something cracked, a smile, a giggle. And then, unexpectedly, I laughed. Loud, real, free. And in that moment, I realized laughter is medicine, not for the body, but for the soul. It reconnects us with joy, with the part of ourselves that still believes in lightness. If it's been too long since you've laughed, this is your sign. Laughter is not a luxury, it's a necessity. Don't let your spirit go too long without it. When I let myself laugh again, something else opened. An awareness of time slipping by, and all the laters I kept telling myself. And that brought me to the ninth sign. Sign 9. If you keep saying later, one day there might be no later. We humans, we're experts at postponing. I'll call her tomorrow. I'll write that book someday. I'll travel next year when things settle down. And just like that, decades pass. One afternoon, while flipping through an old photo album, I found a scribbled note behind a picture from 1987. I had written, "Rome this summer. It's finally happening." I never went. I always had reasons: money, family, work, timing. But truthfully, it wasn't about the reasons. It was about delay. Habitual delay. That was the ninth sign. Every time you say later, a part of your dream quietly withers. We think there will always be more time, but time is not a promise. It is a gift, and it's never guaranteed. That evening, I sat with my laptop and did something I hadn't dared in years. I searched for flights to Rome, and a few months later, I went. I stood in front of the Colosseum, let the sun hit my face and whispered, "I'm here. I finally did it." No, it didn't fix everything, but it healed something inside me, something I didn't even know was broken. If you've been putting off something that stirs your soul, a trip, a letter, a dream, this is your sign. Later is not a date on the calendar. It's a silent goodbye to your own heart. Take the first step, even a small one, because once you do, life begins to meet you halfway. And on the road back from Rome, in the quiet of my heart, I met the 10th sign, one that hurt in a way only love can. Sign 10. If you haven't given or received real love in a while, your soul is hungry. Love isn't always loud. It doesn't always arrive with roses or grand gestures. But its absence, oh, that's deafening. I realized this one quiet evening when I burned my hand while cooking. A minor accident. But in that moment, I instinctively looked around, not in panic, but in hope. Was anyone there to rush to me, to hold my hand, to say, "Let me help"? No one was, not because people didn't care, but because I hadn't allowed space for love in a long time. I had stopped reaching for it, stopped expecting it, and slowly love stopped showing up. That was the 10th sign. If love has been missing for too long, not romance necessarily, but connection, warmth, true care, your soul begins to starve. I miss the softness of love, the kind that shows up in a warm cup of tea made without asking, a gentle touch on your shoulder, a simple, "How was your day?" I missed being seen, so I took the first step. I started texting friends again, called old neighbors, told my daughter I loved her. Not in passing, but slowly, deliberately. "I love you." And one night, she said it back. Clear, real, from the heart. Love didn't return in a grand wave. It trickled in, softly, steadily, with every choice I made to open the door again. If you've been living without love, this is your sign. You still deserve it, you still need it, and it's still possible. Let it in, give it freely, ask for it. The soul doesn't just want love, it runs on it. And once love began to fill the cracks, another voice inside me whispered, "What about your purpose?" And just like that, I arrived at the 11th sign. Sign 11. If you avoid the question, "Why am I here?" you'll start to feel empty. One night's sleep just wouldn't come. I lay in bed, eyes wide open, listening to the silence press against the walls. Then a question floated through the quiet. Slow, heavy, honest. What's the point of it all? That question stayed with me for days. I had spent so much of my life raising kids, working, surviving. But that night, for the first time in a long time, I wondered, what's my reason for being here? Not just as a mother or sister or friend, but as me, Clara. That was the 11th sign. If you've stopped asking about your purpose, or if you're afraid to, you might be drifting instead of living. We often fill our lives with noise so we don't have to ask the hard questions. But when everything quiets down, when the kids are grown, the house is still, the routine becomes silent, the question waits. And so I began the search. I journaled, I prayed, I walked, I listened. And slowly the answer came. You're here to bring light. That's it, to bring comfort, kindness, to offer someone a listening ear, a warm hand, a steady presence. I didn't need a stage. I didn't need applause. I just needed to show up with love. That realization changed the way I spent my days. It gave meaning to the quiet, to the tea I brewed for a friend, to the stories I told my granddaughter, to every "I see you" look I offered someone who felt invisible. If you don't know why you're here, this is your sign. Ask, search, listen. The answer is inside you. It may be quiet, but it is powerful. And once I remembered my purpose, I began to feel something else return, urgency. Because if I had a reason to be here, then time suddenly became sacred. And that urgency led me to the 12th sign. Sign 12. If you're not protecting your time, you're losing your life without noticing. Time. It's the one thing we all think we have, until we realize we don't. We act like time is endless. We waste it on things that don't matter. We give it to people who don't value it. We spend it like we'll always get more. But one afternoon, I looked up from my cup of tea and realized I'd been trading precious hours for noise, for distraction, for obligation, not for joy. That was the 12th sign. If you're not consciously choosing how to spend your time, someone or something else is choosing for you. I thought about how many 5-minute scrolls had turned into an hour. How many conversations I stayed in out of politeness, not connection. How many sunrises I slept through. How many moments I had missed while worrying about the next one. So I made a decision. My time is sacred. I will spend it like it matters. Now I light a candle for no reason. I take slow walks with no destination. I call people who feed my soul, not drain it. And when I say yes, I mean it. If you're moving through your days on autopilot, this is your sign. Stop, breathe, look around, ask yourself, is this how I want to spend my life? Because how you spend your minutes is how you spend your life. Once I began honoring my time, I noticed something else lingering beneath the surface. A quiet fear I had never fully faced. That fear brought me to the 13th sign. Sign 13. If you're afraid of growing old but won't talk about it, a shadow grows inside you. Aging isn't something we're taught to embrace. We're told to hide our wrinkles, dye the grey, act younger, dress younger, feel younger. As if aging is something to be ashamed of, something to fight against. For a long time, I believed that too. On my birthdays, I smiled politely, but deep down, I felt quieter, less seen, like I was fading. Then one morning, standing in front of the mirror, I noticed my hands, soft lines, gentle tremble. 1,000 memories etched into my skin. And I whispered, "These are not flaws. These are proof." That was the 13th sign. If you fear aging but keep silent about it, that fear will take root, and it will start to shrink you from the inside out. We age, yes. But what if aging is not the enemy? What if it's the reward? Every silver hair, a story. Every wrinkle, a lesson. Every slower step, a deeper presence. So I stopped hiding. I wore the colors I love. I let my hair go silver. I stood tall, even when I felt small. Because this version of me, she's earned her place. If you've been quietly afraid of getting older, this is your sign. Say it out loud, face it, and then walk through it. You'll find power there, grace, freedom. And once I stopped fearing the mirror, I began to see something else, a part of me that desperately wanted to be heard, not just seen. And that longing became the 14th sign. Sign 14. If no one really listens to you, you eventually stop talking. It started slowly. I would begin telling a story, and someone would glance at their phone, or nod politely, but their eyes would drift. Sometimes they'd say, "You already told me that, Mom," and move on. So I stopped finishing the story, stopped bringing up the memory, stopped sharing the thought. That was the 14th sign. When you feel unheard for long enough, your voice begins to disappear. Not because it's gone, but because you've buried it. I didn't want to be a burden. I didn't want to talk too much. So I grew quieter. But inside, I was full of words, memories, wisdom, and feelings. Then one day, I went to a local library for a story circle with teenagers. I sat with a group of kids who didn't know me, and I began to speak. They listened, really listened. Their eyes lit up. They asked questions. They laughed. They leaned in, and just like that, I remembered that my voice mattered. Not because it was loud, not because it was perfect, but because it was real. If you've gone silent, this is your sign. Find someone who will listen. And if you can't, write. Speak to the page. Speak to yourself. Just don't let your voice vanish, because speaking is how we remind the world, and ourselves, I'm still here. And when I reclaimed my voice, I realized something else had gone missing, something just as vital, the need to feel valued. That realization brought me to the 15th sign. Sign 15. If no one tells you that you matter, you start to forget that you do. One year on my birthday, my daughter sent me a message that simply read, "Happy birthday, Mum." That was it. No call, no voice, no warmth. It was just a sentence. But behind its coldness, I felt something shift in me. Not anger, not sadness, just a quiet ache. It made me wonder, when was the last time someone truly told me, "You matter"? That was the 15th sign. If no one has affirmed your worth in a long time, you begin to question it yourself. I had given so much, raised children, supported friends, cooked meals, showed up. But over time, when your giving goes unnoticed, you start to feel invisible. So I made a choice. If no one else would say it, then I would. I sat down with a pen and wrote to myself, "Clara, you are kind. You listen when others don't. You still love deeply. You show up with quiet strength. You are allowed to be proud of who you've become." And slowly, those words seeped into the parts of me that had gone numb. If you've been feeling unseen or unimportant, this is your sign. Don't wait for someone else to validate you. Remind yourself. Reclaim yourself. You are valuable, just as you are. And once I began to believe it again, something inside me began to flicker back to life, a long-lost fire, something more than value, more than voice. It was hope, and that became the 16th sign. Sign 16. If you've stopped hoping for anything, life begins to lose its color. Hope is quiet. It doesn't shout. It doesn't demand. But when it leaves, the world turns gray. There was a time when I stopped hoping. I didn't even realize it at first. I still made tea, still went for walks, still smiled when people passed me by. But inside, I wasn't expecting anything anymore. Not a surprise visit, not a heartfelt message, not a new beginning, just more of the same. That was the 16th sign. If you've stopped looking forward to something, anything, your soul is slowly dimming. And it's not about big things. Hope isn't always about miracles or mountains. Sometimes it's as small as, I hope someone calls today. I hope I see the sunset. I hope I laugh again. One day, I received a letter from an old friend. She wrote, "Clara, I never told you how much you meant to me, but you did. You still do." I cried reading it, because in that moment I realized someone, somewhere had remembered me, and that meant I could remember myself. I decided then, every day, I would hope for one little thing. And you know what happened? The more I hoped, the more I saw. The color returned, not in fireworks, but in soft, quiet glimmers. If you've given up on hope, this is your sign. Please try again, just once. Hope is the soul's way of staying alive, even when everything else goes silent. And as I let hope gently wrap itself around me again, I came face to face with something I had been running from for a long time, being alone. And that realization led me to the 17th sign, sign 17. If you can't sit alone with yourself, you haven't fully met who you are. One afternoon, I turned everything off. No TV, no music, no phone, just me, a chair, the ticking of a clock, silence. At first, it felt peaceful, but then something strange happened. Restlessness. I shifted, stood up, sat back down, looked out the window. I felt unsettled. But why? Because in that stillness, I started to hear the voice I'd been avoiding, my own. That was the 17th sign. If you can't sit quietly with yourself, you might still be a stranger to the person you truly are. We fill our days with distractions, tasks, noise, scrolling, not just because we're busy, but because silence is confronting. It brings up everything we've avoided, regrets, dreams, feelings that were never fully processed. But here's what I've learned. Silence isn't empty, it's where truth waits. So I created a small ritual, 15 minutes each day, just me and quiet, no expectations, no goals, just presence. Some days it was uncomfortable. Other days I found peace. And little by little, I stopped fearing the quiet. If you find yourself avoiding stillness, this is your sign. Sit, stay, listen. Your soul is not your enemy. It's your oldest companion. And in that sacred silence, another longing began to rise. One I had tucked away for years. The desire to leave something behind. A trace, a legacy, a voice that would outlive me. And that brought me to the 18th sign. Sign 18. If you think nothing will remain after you're gone, an emptiness begins to grow. One evening, I was organizing my bookshelf and came across an old notebook, full of poems, letters, and unfinished thoughts from my younger self. Pages filled with wonder, longing, hope. As I flipped through them, I felt a lump rise in my throat. At the bottom of one page I had written, "Live in such a way that something of you remains." I paused and asked myself, if I left tomorrow, what would remain? That was the 18th sign. If you believe your life will leave no trace, a quiet emptiness begins to grow inside you. We often think legacy means fame, fortune, or grand achievements. But sometimes legacy is simpler. A grandchild who remembers your laugh, a neighbor who recalls your kindness, a note in a drawer that one day makes someone cry and smile at the same time. So I began writing again, not for an audience, not for perfection, just to leave behind something true. I wrote letters to my granddaughter, stories she hadn't heard, lessons I hoped she'd carry. I wrote as if my words could outlive my breath. And maybe they will. If you've ever felt like your life doesn't leave a mark, this is your sign. You still have time. You still have something to give. Whether it's a garden you plant, a recipe you pass down, or simply the way you make someone feel safe, that is legacy. And as I wrote those final words in one of my letters, I realized something powerful. I am still alive, which means there's still more to do, more to feel, more to become. That awakening led me to the 20th and final sign, the one that changed everything. Sign 19. If you still want to live, it's never too late. I'm 65. My hands are softer now. My steps, slower. My thoughts take their time. Some names slip my memory, and some dreams have faded quietly into the past. But every morning I wake up. And still, I want to live. I want to smell the rain. I want to sip tea and watch the light shift across the floor. I want to laugh, belly deep and unfiltered. I want to love, even if my heart has been bruised. I want to learn, to give, to grow. Still. This was the 20th sign, the most important one. If after everything, the pain, the silence, the losses, you still want to live, then life still wants you. I used to think life passed me by, that the best parts were behind me. But I've come to realize, if there is breath in your lungs, there is purpose in your presence. So I don't waste time asking, is it too late? I ask, what can I still do? Whom can I still love? What beauty can I still find, even in the quiet? You see, living isn't just about doing, it's about being.